All right, so on today's lesson, we are going to be focused on graphing exponential equations in this case, and we're going to go ahead and actually determine which equations are going to be a growth, which are a decay. So let's go ahead and take a look at this here, guys. This is a bit of a review. So we're going to go ahead and focus first on this exponential growth. Now, I am going to be starting in this case, let's say my first term where the initial value is actually going to be a 3 here. Let's say it's a 3. Because if we substitute in a 0, raise it to that power, it's going to give us a 1. And then, let's say this is our first term. Now, from here, I actually want to go ahead and go to 6. From 6, I want to go ahead and go to 12. From 12 to 24, right? Now, what we're doing in this case is if I check here, I'm actually going by 2's, right? I'm multiplying in this case by 2. That new number, we're going to go ahead and multiply it now by 2. And then the other new number, we're going to go ahead and multiply by 2. So let me just create an equation here. We had y equals 3 because that was the first term. And then we have a common ratio of 2 to the power of x. All right. Now, in this case, if I were to put in there a -1, we actually get 3/2. All right. And in this case, guys, because we do have a negative, if you substitute in a negative, then that becomes a fraction, which is 1/2. 1/2 times 3 is 3/2, right? Now, notice in this case, if I were to graph it, let's say I were to graph it in this case. Let's go ahead and graph it here. Let's go ahead and create a graph. All right, this is x, and this is y. Now, in this case, our starting point here, let's go ahead and go by 3's in this case. 3, 6, 9, 12. And then we'll do 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2. So let's just do some labeling. -2, 3, 6, 9, and 12. Now, let's go ahead and plot that. I have a 0, 3, so this is actually our starting point. And then if I go from 1, it's going to go to 6. From 2, it's going to go to 12. And if I do -1, it's going to be 3/2, which is about 1.5, so that's the middle here. 0.5. And, I mean, I could keep going. So if I were to actually draw my graph, it's going to look something like this. And notice in this case, this is considered a growth because based on the information, the bigger the x gets, the more our graph is going to be going up. All right, let's go ahead and take a look at this next one. Now, we're starting off with the same one. Our initial value here is a 3. Now, I want to go ahead and actually multiply now. By a 1/2, right? If I do that, that becomes 3/2, right? Now, if I multiply that new 3/2 by another 1/2, that is going to become 3/4. And once again, we could check this on the calculator, guys. Multiply that again. That would become, in this case, 3/8, right? And if you want to go ahead and check that first term, multiplying by that 3/2, or that 1/2 actually, because once again it's a negative, it would be reciprocal, so this here would be 6. Now let's go ahead and graph this. Well, before graphing it, let's finish the equation here. 1/2 times x. Now let's go ahead and graph it here, and we're going to go ahead and create our graph, looking something like this. That's y. All right, 1, 2, and then we have 3 and we have 6. So that's 3, 6, -1, 1, 2, right? Now, starting off, our starting point here is 0, 3, which is there. And then 1 and 3/2 would be, 3/2 is actually 1.5, which would be the middle. And the middle would be let's say here, middle would be there. And then if it would be 2, then it would be 3/4, and it'd be somewhere here. And I could actually just keep on going, and this would actually be something that's getting closer and closer to 0, but really doesn't touch it. On the other side, I have a -1 and a 6. So our graph in this case looks something like this, right? And it's just going to continue going. Like I mentioned, it's just going to continue going. And this would actually represent a decay. Now, if I were to compare this one along with this one, the only thing different in this case is actually the common ratio. Let's go ahead and use some vocab there. Our common ratio on this first one is 2, right? Now, in this case, if our common ratio, the absolute value of our common ratio is greater than 1, then we're going to go ahead and have a growth. If in this case, once again, the absolute value of our common ratio is greater than 1, we're going to go ahead and have a growth. If in this case, the common ratio or the absolute value in this case of the common ratio is less than 1, then it's going to be a decay. That's going to be a decay. All right, so once again, based on your common ratio is how we can distinguish whether we have a growth or decay. So let's go ahead and take a look at this first example, and we're going to go ahead and graph this equation here. And in this case, I have h of x equals 27 times 1/3 x. Now, just by looking at our equation, this here is my common ratio. The question for you here is the absolute value of 1/3 greater or less than 1? The answer in this case is less than, which means this here is going to be a decay. So if I were to be graphing it, it should be going down. Now, let's go ahead and actually create just a small table here. I have x, I have y. Let's say x in this case, if it equals a 0, the first term is going to be 27. Now, let's say if it equals a 1, if I input a 1 in here, that's going to be 1/3 times 27, that's a 9. All right. And then in this case, if I were to input, let's say a 2, that's going to be 1/3 squared, which becomes 1/9. 1/9 times 27 is 3. All right, so let's go ahead and graph this. Let's go ahead and graph it. And that's x, that's y. And let's see. This is 3. See, let's go by 9s. 1, 9, 18. Let's say 27 is there. All right. So this is 9, 18, and 27. Let's move that y a little bit more up. All right. And we have 0, 1, and 2, right? Put in the -1 over here. All right, so let's go ahead and plot that. I have a 0.27 is my starting point. Then from there, I have 1.9, and then I should have 2.3, which is a little less than half. And it's going to look something like that. So I could actually draw my graph looking something like that. And that would be considered in this case